Hey, Patrick.
Hey, Tim.
So, I want to do something a little bit different today.
Okay.
We're going to talk about barbecue. We're going to talk about the different schools of barbecue, but more specifically, I want to talk to you about the Alabama school of barbecue because it's mayonnaise
Wait,
based.
what? Hold on a second, Tim. No, we're not talking about we're not talking about barbecue food, all right? As much as I would like to talk about that, we watched Culus from Deep Space Nine this week, and we're getting this over with. So we can talk more about wait, did you say mayonnaise?
Yeah, right? And we're back. Again, thank you to Captain Meat Shield for the wonderful rendition that we use as our intro music.
Do you think Captain Meatshield would use Alabama style
You
on his
know,
meat?
I don't think I don't think any reasonable people would
There we go. Well, he
because
is, yeah.
it's it's mayonnaise. Like mayonnaise, really? Like I just don't understand. I don't understand a lot about Alabama. They gave us Jeff Sessions. Anyway, diverting from that. Today we're discussing Deep Space Nine's early episode of Culus, which, as we both agreed pre-episode, profoundly boring episode where nothing seems to feel like it happens because the dramatic tension is set to -1.
Yeah. This is a frustratingly dull episode of television, not just of Star Trek or of anything else. Um, just my early thoughts, my thoughts immediately after watching it were like, I know first seasons can be rough on a lot of shows, and sometimes they take their footing. But what is it with Star Trek? At least of the reboot,
Yeah,
or not reboot, but Next Generation had a bad first season. Deep Space Nine had a mostly boring first season. Voyager was again bad first season,
had a mostly
mostly
bad
bad
first
first
run.
run. Yeah, mostly bad run. But then in that Enterprise, the series I like, I would also admit that its first season again, like a lot of time getting their mark, and I'm like, well, there's so many great shows that have great first seasons. That's when they get
Yeah,
hooked. It's like, is like, did they think that because it's Star Trek and they've got this built-in audience, they can take a while to maybe tell a decent story? I don't know, but this is not a decent story.
it even starts in the most boring way possible with Julian Bashir giving this woman a story about his greatest battle, air quotes, in which he's taking his final at Starfleet Academy, and O'Brien is the audience like avatar in this because he's watching it and he's like, "The fuck is
Yeah,
this?
rolling his
This
eyes.
is stupid." And praise be to the actress that was there. She really sells the fact that she somehow gives a shit about anything Julian is saying until they get a message saying that they have to run to the like shuttle bay or whatever the landing pad is because the Ganges is coming back and life support is failing.
Yes. That and yeah. No, you're right about the actress who actually absolutely sells the interest in his test, taking a test, and but Bashir's line is it gets him every time, which is okay. Like it's like Orion is like, did he really just say that? And I was thinking the exact same thing watching it. Yes. So the Ganges, one of the runabouts, which are one of the cooler parts, I think, of the one of the cooler things Deep Space Nine came up with, their little shuttlecraft hybrids, um, is got apparently Dax and some generic ensign are coming back from a trip to the Delta Quadrant. They've just come through I'm sorry, the Gamma Quadrant. We are in a different quadrant now. The Gamma Quadrant, they've come through the wormhole and there's no power. They have like 2 minutes before they basically suffocate to death. And they're doing a life sign reading, and they said, "You say it's just two?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, I'm reading three, so ah." And then there's some techno babble. They managed to basically push the doors open, which is sort of weird. Um,
Well, basically they do it because O'Brien hooks up what amounts to like he basically gives the shuttlecraft a jump from a battery pack that he slaps to the
yeah,
side.
yeah.
And it's enough to open the door and they get inside.
Well, anyway, you'd think that there would be some kind of manual override, but there's not. They get inside, and it turns out that everyone's going to be okay, and their passenger is none other than a woman they found, a human woman they found on a planet in the Gamma Quadrant, who said she'd been there for 2 years, and it's Vash. Now, who remembers Vash?
Well, I remember her because last time we saw her, she was hanging out with Picard in Sherwood Forest after Cupid, and then decided that she was going to run around the galaxy with Q at the end of the episode in one of the more bizarre endings where it's like, you could have a happy future, or Q can take you everywhere because he's such a reliable guy.
Yeah.
And she chooses to go with that.
Yeah, but she's like sort of adventurous though, and kind of also, I mean, it kind of makes sense it made sense enough for her character, I thought. But
yeah,
like they got her way. Like Picard, like really wants to like get into a relationship with her, because she was first introduced on Captain's Holiday, on Risa, the Pleasure Planet. Riker banned for life. Well, anyways, yeah. So she's run into them a few times before, or Star Trek. Since they say it's Vash, and actually that's the stinger.
Yeah, it's O'Brien who like identifies her, and I don't really think they interacted much in Cupid. Like, I don't think they like. I think he like saw her at one point, and that's it. But they get them off the shuttlecraft. They're walking away, and there's this person standing right next to the shuttle in the TNG uniform. And it's at this point that I'm like, it turns around and it's John Delancey as Q.
Yep.
And this is where I am immediately like, you know what? This episode would have been so much better if they just shown Vash, had O'Brien explain, like he does anyway, that she like left with Q, but not show him just yet. Like, build some tension about how she got out there, and just kind of reference that Q is out there instead of like having John Delancey turn around and be like,
it's Q,
jazz hands.
Who's up for some more wacky adventures? And usually I'm all for Q and his wacky adventures, because usually there's a point to them. But
not here.
They forgot the point when they were putting it together. Yeah, so they cut to the intro after the big reveal of Q. And I'm sorry, but Deep Space Nine has the worst opening of any Star Trek series, including Enterprise. The music is so boring. The visuals are terrible. I know that it's hard to make a space station exciting, and they try later on, but in this first season especially, like, the music is dull. It's subdued.
Yeah, when they add the bass line, it gets a little bit better, but
the visuals are just
like basically you're just watching like the equivalent of a busy intersection in space.
Not even really.
I mean, it's kind of hard.
When they added the stuff, they added more CGI later. Right in this first season, it's mostly just long shots of like beauty shots of the station, which is whatever. I mean, it's not really. It's one of my complaints about Deep Space Nine is that I think it had the worst opening of any Star Trek series. But that's not really the problem. In fact, it's a high point compared to many things that happen in this episode.
It's true.
So they get Vash off the. So we come in and it's called Culus and let's see. I just watched it this morning and already what happened is flying from my mind. It doesn't really stick.
For me, I watched this about a week ago, and I can kind of remember the broad strokes, but I just keep Memory Alpha open.
Yeah.
So that I can like hit the high, like the important points. And basically, the next thing they do is they take Vash to Julian Bashir, who in this episode got the direction of horny idiot the whole episode.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
As he's like desperately trying to get into her pants, and they spend like 10 minutes doing this, or at least that's what it feels
like. 10 minutes. Yeah, I think it's only like 5, or not even that. But he gives just the worst. The dialogue is his dialogue is terrible. It's like sub. It's the stuff you'd find in like sub pickup artist stuff. Like, it's going to be a lot lonelier. It's like, I wish I could say there was more wrong with you, but you're just perfect. So you could, and their flirting is just like she's clearly like whatever, or she pretends she's into it. And actually she's supposed to be. They hint it is. There's no chemistry. And the lines are so terrible. You're like, this is a beautiful woman who liked to hang out with Jean-Luc Picard and talk with and had a great lot of fun with him. And this blathering horny idiot is really like going to interest her. Like, no. And so Vash leaves. She takes her 24th century duffel bag, and then basically says she's leaving the Enterprise, not the Enterprise, the station as soon as possible. Meanwhile, we've barely seen any of the rest of the station's crew at this point. We haven't even we've seen Kira briefly at the beginning. This is a complaint about the episode, is that it doesn't give anybody really that to do. We haven't seen Dax at all, except for her briefly in the getting pulled out of the.
She wakes up.
Like, they never really say how they found her or where they found Vash either. I was just thinking, no, they just say, "Oh, we found her on a planet." Like, well, what are you guys doing on the planet? We don't know. They just, did they pick up? No, we're never told any.
No part of it makes a ton of sense.
And Vash keeps telling him it's personal. I don't want to talk about why I was there. I don't want to talk about how I got there. I don't want to talk to the Daystrom Institute. I just want to go away from
somewhere else.
And they're all like, oh, okay. And they really, obviously, they have no power to stop her. But I mean, they could, considering she was been in an unknown area of space or something. They can make up some story. They don't really seem all that. I mean, they're kind of interested in keeping her, but not enough interest to really drive anything moving forward. So that happens, and then she goes to, I think another really weird scene is where she checks her stuff in at the lockbox with all of her the stuff she's brought back from the Gamma Quad.
And the thing is, like, she goes through and, like, moving stuff, they're putting things in, and you're like, okay. And then they, like, focus in on, like, clearly, this is what the episode is about.
Right.
She opens it and shows it to them, and then they put it in the box. And you're like, okay, I get it. This is going to be important. This is going to factor into something later. But the scene is, like, it doesn't add anything. Like, they have a whole discussion about, like, the technical aspects of the optical reader. It's like, this doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah.
Like, I do not care about this.
Yeah, she's like, oh, this was a Mark 7 or so-and-so. He's like, Mark 12. He's really haughty. I guess he's supposed to be like, I mean, like, maybe like a jeweler who'd be really kind of like a high-end jeweler type guy, but he's all really haughty about all the crap. She's like, oh, he basically seems all the stuff she's bringing back seems like crap. Really sees this one glowing object that's the guffin for the episode.
And even then, like, who is she so worried about hiding this from? I mean, she's hiding from an omnipotent god. Like, what is the point of, like, making sure the security standards of the box are up to spec? It's like, this is Q. Like, he can literally do anything within the context of the show.
And she knows this.
Are you telling me that he's suddenly bound by, like, metal boxes?
Yeah, exactly.
But that's been the cure to all this the whole time. It's like, this is stupid.
Yeah, and she's playing it cagey, like she's hiding from someone, and then they're playing it like she's cagey, and I don't know. It's like watching it. The movement is very slow. Like, I don't know if again, we can talk about if it's direction or what, but the way she's delivering the lines is sort of almost like she's reading off cue cards. Like, she's cue cards. No, but she's really not that into the performance. I mean, which is because, again, she gave really good performances in both Captain's Holiday and in Cupid. But here she's like kind of barely there. Well, at least she does. Her heart's not really in the episode, and then she wanders. And then O'Brien, takes her off to show her quarters.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a brief scene where O'Brien's looking at the shuttle, doesn't find anything wrong with it. They can't identify what happened or why it was drained. And they're like, okay, whatever. So there's another power drain in the station. They're like, that's weird. What could have possibly happened? Oh, well. And they keep moving. Yeah. And then the next thing is that O'Brien takes Vash to her quarters, and she's like, so how's Jean-Luc doing? And, like, O'Brien is written the way that you would normally expect basically an enlisted man to respond to someone asking about how, like, a just slightly below admiral officer is doing. He's like, yeah, I haven't seen him in like a year. Last time I saw him, he was fine, so I assume he's okay. Like, the ship hasn't blown up.
Yeah,
so
they're all good. Still alive last I checked.
And she's like, oh, okay. And then she goes into her cabin, and O'Brien's like, and just walks off. And Q appears and starts this weird stalkerish behavior of, like, a jilted lover, which is not exactly the dynamic they had before.
Yeah, he puts the whole, like, MRA thing onto her. He starts negging her a bit, and
telling her she's nothing without him.
And exactly. Or leave her on a planet for 2 years, which it's not entirely clear that he actually left her there, because they never actually say why she's angry at him. I mean, he's clearly he did something. I'm assuming he did something Q-like, which is, par for the course with him. But usually the stuff he does with humans is, at least the ones he seems to like, is at least a way to make them grow a bit. But she's maybe tired of his games or whatever. I mean, they have all this dialogue that's like almost like sub-lovers quarrel, but never quite. Since there's absolutely zero chemistry between the two, you never actually feel like these two ever done more than maybe like give each other a hug or something. The dialogue is really bad. But then he's basically saying, you need to come back with me. Come on. He's not like forcing her to, but he's doing some weird stuff. Like the door rings and in walks Quark. And then Q immediately snaps his fingers, and Quark disappears in the Q flash. And Vash like, bring him back. And it's kind of, he's like, why? It's like at that point, because Quark in this episode is really awful. You're kind of like, yeah, why? But anyway, he's like, fine. So Q disappears. Quark comes back, and Quark has already heard about the, gems and stones from the Gamma Quadrant, and wants to begin to basically become her partner as she auctions.
And the whole scene is deeply unsettling because, like, the ear massage thing goes on for so long.
It really does.
Like, normally, like, whenever they do it in other parts of, like, this show or other series, it's like a little thing that happens. This is, like, a good 45 seconds to a minute of time spent massaging his ears, and you're just like, do I need to see this? Like, this is unsettling. Like, I'm not okay with this.
And just everybody, we're assuming but if you don't, the Ferengi's most erogenous zone is their ears, and what do they call it? What's the name for it? Whatever it is to massage the ears has its own term.
Umox.
Yes, and it's basically like she's jerking him off. And he reacts in such a way, like he's like 50-50, and then she basically grabs his ears and starts rubbing, and it's disturbing, like what is going on, and B, it's disturbing because and then B, he's suddenly like, okay, 40%, 30, oh god, 22, and then after this goes on for way too long, or it feels way too long, he's like, okay, and she stops and he's like, that was incredible. And it's like, oh my god, it's like, just ask her if it was good for her too. It's really gross. And again, she's not into it at all. Like, her facial expression is like, I'm like getting a paycheck, and I'm gonna jerk this Frankie's ears off for money, which is essentially what she's doing. No, no judge if that's, that she obviously is going to get very rich off this, but she certainly trusts this guy. This is what's so weird about it, right? So she's got all this stuff in, from the Gamma Quadrant. She can clearly go anywhere and sell it to all sorts of people, but she's like, this guy at the bar might know some shady characters and might give her some money. And she's like, okay, sure, let's have the auction here on what randos you're getting in. You should have a decent fence, or at least a way to, if she's been doing this for so many years, or at least a way to move it in a way that seems a little less shady than some guy who works at the bar at the space station got brought to. But whatever. Anyways, so that happens.
And then the next thing we see is Bashir comes in, asks her to dinner, and then gets all giddy and runs out and goes to wait for her at, like, the station's restaurant.
Oh yeah, he gives he's like, oh yes, the 15 minutes will be the longest of my life as I wait for you. It's like, oh my god. And she's like, oh, that's so sweet. And then and so Q decides that he's gonna mess around and do some classic Q mess arounds. Dresses up like a Bajoran for some reason, and tells Bashir he's making a massive mistake. When Bashir doesn't, and again he's doing the jealous lover thing, right? And then convinces Bashir that he's really tired, needs to go take a nap,
which he does for the rest of the episode. Yes. Like, I imagine, like, Sedig had, like, some other engagement that week that he needed to go attend, and this is how they wrote him out of the script for the week.
Yeah, so, I mean, like, if he was getting paid by the minute on screen? I don't know.
Something like
Yeah.
that. And then,
He,
as Bashir leaves, for some reason, O'Brien is there yet again, because apparently Chief O'Brien just sits in the alcove drinking coffee all day. Like, that's his work shift. Sees Q, and immediately, like, has the reaction of the rest of the fans, which is just like, fuck.
yeah.
All right, I gotta go let
I
people know.
got it.
This is
Yeah,
bad.
Q's here, and of course, everybody knows who Q is now because he's the one who introduced the Borg to humans. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, back.
Which is not at all important to, Captain Sisko.
Yeah, right. This is
at
yeah.
all.
You can basically say this guy's more responsible for his wife's death than Picard ever was. But this that's never brought up because I guess they forgot about it because frankly, there actually could have been some decent dramatic tension there. But why bother? So he tells the captain that, or I'm sorry, Commander Sisko, that Q is around, and and then meanwhile, Vosh and Quark are talking about how much they're going to ask for this, that, and the other for the objects, and yeah, they're planning they're planning their little thing, and she doesn't seem to miss what's his name at all. She was supposed to meet him for dinner, and she is
like he's a complete afterthought.
She just ran to work, and they're plotting out how much they're going to charge for what. And meanwhile, Quark is like saying, "Oh, no one's going to want." He's still trying to like Ferengi her down because again, I'm sorry, Ferengi, space Jews. As honestly, I don't think the Ferengi get off the page in today's day and age. Maybe there's a reason we haven't seen any of them.
You know what? Maybe in Discovery we're not actually seeing Klingons. Those are actually Ferengi. They've been rebooted.
I don't know. I mean, but anyway, it's like again, he's basically saying, "Oh no, it's only worth like 5 bars of gold plus platinum for like the jewel of the piece." And she's like, "No, it's worth like 200 times that." And then, yeah, obviously it is. But he's like talking her down and stuff like that. So what happens after that? Again, I watched it this morning. This is really
okay. So at this point, Sisko comes in to talk to Vash and says, "Hey, we understand that last time you were in Federation space, you were hanging out with Q." At which point, Q shows up, changes his uniform, and starts like talking to to Sisko. Now I'm doing it too.
Yeah.
And at this point, he's like, "I know, we'll have a boxing match."
Well, it takes a couple minutes for them to get there. Like first, they do have the boxing match. First he taunts Sisko, calling him a commander, and also that he's like, "What did you do to get this backwater assignment?" Which, good question.
Fair point.
Fair point. And then he's like, "Oh, I like the new uniforms." And I'm like, and I got really angry at that. But like, no one likes the new uniforms. These are the opening. DS9 also introduces the worst uniforms in Star Trek history.
Phenomenal.
And so Q saying that he likes the new duds is like, no, Q, you don't. You could have made a joke about how bad you did. Another missed opportunity. And then so he tries to spar with Sisko a bit here, right? Verbally,
verbally spar.
But Sisko isn't having it and wants to know like what Q did to the station with the graviton beam flying on. And Q basically says he has nothing to do with it, which he doesn't actually lie all that much. That's the one thing, he doesn't lie. I mean, he obfuscates. If you ask him a question straight up, he'll tell you. He wants you to know if he's effing with you. Or fucking with you. So, him saying, yeah, it's like, I'm flattered you think it's me, but I really don't have time to like, messing around should just be low on the priority. I'm sorry, your station is pretty low list of priorities, which is true. He's there for the woman, not to mess with the ship. So, and again, like meanwhile, they're telegraphing what the real problem is. So anyway, yeah, so right. Avery Brooks, Sisko. Can you please describe what happens next?
Avery Sisko.
So then he finally challenges him to something.
And I think that the line that Avery Brooks drops is that I'm not Picard. And I think this whole episode was basically written around that idea. Like, I half believe that the Fast and the Furious 8 started with the hashtag F8 and then they just kind of wrote a movie around it. I think that's
Fate.
what happened with this line, which is like, yeah, they really were trying to establish that, like, look, this is how it was done in the past. We're going a different direction. And so they, like, changed it and went with, like, we're going to have Cisco just punch him in the face. And, to a certain respect, it's a good moment because it really does kind of differentiate that Avery Brooks is playing Cisco as a little bit unhinged, but still a capable officer, which, fine, we'll take that. It's different than Picard.
He is, yeah. He lost his wife. He's not supposed to, he's an angry man. At least he's an angry black man. I'm sorry, no. But at the beginning of the season, the beginning of the series, he is angry. He's angry at a lot of stuff. I mean, he's lost his wife and, like, the worst. He's not in the best place when he comes onto the show, which is getting into his anger is actually one of the better things they do throughout the series. But they're not. So yeah, what's funny about this scene, and I remember liking this when I saw it the first time, but now watching it now, the only thing I like about the scene is Q's get up and his old timey mustache as he pretends to fight him like old school, like 1970s, like 1880s, 1890s, like Marcus, rules. And then Cisco hits him with a couple, not sucker punches, but a couple punches to the gut and then right in the face. It's not that hard, and Q falls down. He's like, "You hit me!" Like A, you asked him to. And then B's like, "I'm not Picard," which is a good line. And then Q has the better line, which is like, "Yes, you're much more easier to provoke," which makes things a lot more, which means you're not as smart, essentially. And then he disappears as there's more problems on the ship.
Yeah, and it's this episode, like, they have a brief instance of where Odo is interrogating Quark about the forthcoming auction. And, like, this is the first scene of, Odo and Quark bickering back and forth in what actually becomes, like, a really fun dynamic in the show. And it kind of starts here. And, you can kind of see the broad outlines of, like, their characters taking shape next to each other. Odo's a little more passionate than he is later. It's a functional scene. But
yeah. I mean, he makes a joke about a gold latinum bucket for Odo to sleep in.
Yeah. I will say, though, it's fun. But
what's funny is, these two characters will eventually bounce off each other rather well, but they're just trying to play Quark. And right now Quark is like the nefarious, but like sort of Rick in a Casablanca type. And then Odo is Mr. A little more like stick up his butt security guy.
Yeah, and this episode really does exemplify the growing pains of the first season. Like, you can see the things like general shape, but there's still a way to go. So, after all this is said and done, there
is a hull breach.
Yeah, which, they're like, man, more gravitons. So weird.
Yeah, and at this point they say, well, why is Q messing with us like this? He's never, like, it doesn't seem like he would do this. And then Cisco has the one good insight he really has this episode, which is that, I don't think this is Q. This doesn't seem like his style. And it's not. Q's not going to be straight up destruction. But then he proceeds to go ask no questions about what's changed on the ship since this stuff started happening, or on the ship, the station. Vosh showed up besides Q. And what is Vosh doing?
Fuck lot of nothing.
Exactly. A whole lot of nothing. Continuing to do a whole lot of nothing. But at this point, they still are like basically the 4 Starfleet officers that are on the ship. Because I'll say this, for all the people on the ship, on the station, there seems to be like maybe 6 or 7 Starfleet officers, at least in this episode, and nobody, and there's like nobody else they can rely on, because most, like, it's at this point that the episode almost becomes like 2 separate episodes entirely. You have the episode that's the goofy auction with Quark, Vosh, Q, and Quark's like goofy rich idiots who will spend God knows how much for things they don't understand. And then this graviton crisis, which may as well be happening on 2 different planets, 2 different space stations. Because anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but
and then, like, immediately following the Dax inspection, the Quark Odo investigation, we have, like, again, Q tracks Vash down the hallway and goes through, like, this very awkward process of being like, you remember that one time that this happened? It makes her sick. This other thing happened, makes it worse. And eventually gets it to where she's, like, an 87-year-old woman with leprosy and, like, a raging case of face herpes all at once.
That is
like,
right?
And then he's like, sends her back to normal. And he's like, just remember that if I wasn't such a nice guy, you would be so screwed.
Toxic masculinity. No, no. Again, he pulls the basically. This is like an abuser's move. This is something. This is something someone who is an abuser of women does. Or this is an abusive relationship. And obviously, I guess that's to show us why she wants out. But I wish they'd talked more about if he'd done stuff like that during the time they were together, because Q's never been. I mean, he's always been a dick, but he's never quite been as cruel as he is to her in this episode. Because that's a cruel thing. I mean, she basically leaves her there to basically he's threatening her, come with me or you're basically gonna die. And
it's just it reads badly. Nothing about this particular sequence is good, and you're just like, Q has always been kind of well, at least in his later iterations, aside from the very beginning of Next Generation, just kind of a whimsical, kind of evil. This is one of those things where he is being very specifically particularly evil. I can undo everything and crumple you like a cheap set of cards, and you will just mess without me. And it's ugh, I can understand how much she wants to get away because you've been doing this the whole time. I get that. I wouldn't want to have anything to do with you either.
Yeah, it's all that petty shit you always said about humanity when you were making fun of Picard. Oh, that's you in this episode, Q.
Yeah, exactly.
It's I mean, he's always been sort of he's always had that, the ego and the and his and the inflated sense of importance. But this is just again a cruel and unusual. And okay, I mean, obviously he never comes out and says, I really want to be with you, baby. But it's basically his actions are like the jilted boyfriend who was left because he was abusive, and it's oh, I'll show you abusive, which doesn't feel right for the character, and doesn't feel right for the way they left. And considering the way Vash is playing it, she just plays like she's annoyed with him more than she's afraid of him too. I mean, he's obviously trying to scare her a bit with that whole disease thing, but then the scene just sort of happens, though, right? And because she still goes to him.
Public. It's in public. The promenade.
He's right there. Yeah, it's right there, and Q's good luck. And meanwhile, Q's sort of wandering around the ship at this time. Meanwhile, there's another thing going on.
Yeah.
It's that
power's being turned into gravitons and sucked out of the station.
Yeah.
And at this point, it's starting to get to be a real problem. And Dax suggests flooding the station with ionized tritium gas to track the particle flow, which
it's technobabble. Which Q calls it technobabble in this scene, which is actually one of the better lines. He said Picard and his gang would have solved this technobabble hours ago, which is again also true.
The thing I love about this part is that basically Q proceeds to just shit on everyone in a hilarious way, because O'Brien's like, you know what? We've dealt with you before. Why don't you go do something useful? And then Q's like, have I met you?
Yeah.
proceeds to just brush him off.
O'Brien, I was on the Enterprise. Weren't you one of the little people? O'Brien's sort of yes.
And basically he just tells everybody that I'm not your problem, but you know what? If you're gonna treat me like an asshole, fuck you. And just leaves for a while.
Yeah.
And so this whole scene is just, them establishing that okay, the problem's getting worse, and we're gonna pump this dangerous gas into the station, which O'Brien, maybe it's not at this point, but it's later. He's like, well, it is dangerous. They go through the whole thing of it's very dangerous. We can only use a certain amount. The amount we're pumping in is just, it'll be enough. It'll be fine. It won't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
And so they start this process to try and eliminate where the gravitons are going in the station, which conveniently, all this is happening around the same time that Quark's auction begins.
Well, yeah, we only get introduced to one of the auction, the potential bidders. Makeup is generally good on Deep Space Nine, and it's good here. And they actually have a good group of aliens, including ones they put they wrappings over their faces, no makeup needed, just some extra.
Yeah.
But at least they all look rich and dumb enough to be Quark's
Quark's marks.
Quark's marks, and then meanwhile, there's another thing going on with Vash, kind of half-heartedly saying she's going to go back to Earth because the Daystrom Institute wants to talk to her. Daystrom Institute, shout out Daystrom. All right. But and that's great, but then she seems so half. She doesn't really seem like she's all that interested into it. Again, this goes back to her performance in this episode. But she's like, "Oh, I've slept in my last tent. I don't want to go and sell more of this stuff and go dig up stuff. I'm gonna make all this money. Why shouldn't I go back to Earth?" And again, and at that point, I mean, you'd assume all hell breaks loose, but you're only told that because you never actually see any of this anywhere, except for the fact that they said, "Oh, we've got hull cracks everywhere, and now the ship's being pulled or pushed in a different direction, and they're going right towards the wormhole."
Which is funny because there's like a very pregnant pause when they discuss the coordinates. They stop and then they turn and they're like, towards the wormhole. And it's like, okay, you could have sped that up a little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit. Your delivery was a little slow.
This is when the show really diverges into two separate shows. So back down on the promenade in Quark's bar, they're doing the auction and they're like basically cleaning up. Quark's like basically becoming a multimillionaire through all this stuff, and so is Vosh. Meanwhile, Q shows up at one point, beams in and tells them all that they're all going to die because the ship's being pulled to the station's being pulled towards a wormhole. And they're like, whoa! They kind of panic for all of like 5 seconds, and then Quark says, no, everything is under control. It's all fine. And they're like, okay. And then Q's like, whatever. And meanwhile, then we go to ops where there are maybe 6 people. Nobody's panicking as the ship is being pulled. I mean, maybe it's good they're not panicking, but there's no like alarms going off. There's no like, we really need to fix this. This is where the line comes in with the, if we flood any more of this stuff in there,
we're all going to die in 4 years.
4 years, which is funny. And then
basically, like they're pumping in airborne asbestos.
Yes, exactly. They'll all be dead soon. So I mean, better line's like better dead in 4 years than dead today. Would have been something. But they figured out something with bringing the ship's reactors back online. They technobabbled their way to pinpoint the location. It's on the promenade. Meanwhile, like they're finally bidding on the object that's obviously causing us the problem, which is a little glowing sphere thing. And it's like and they get up to like what 2,000 bars of gold plus latinum.
It goes crazy high.
And eventually, Q says 1 million bars of gold plus latinum. And meanwhile, Quark is literally orgasming, and every time the price goes up because he loves money. See, in case you didn't know that before, that's his only defining trait in this episode is that, or that, and he likes getting I guess, Ferengi versions of the hand job.
The ear job.
He's basically coming though, as the price goes up, and right when he gets to the $1 million, he sells it to Q for $1 million, and then they discover it. And again, what's funny is as they're walking out of the promenade, the ship is literally the station is literally like minutes away from being torn to billions of pieces. And no one is doing anything. There is no sense of panic. There's not even like a red alert. No one's like, there's no attempt to evacuate going on. The people are walking around doing business as usual. There is no sense of any kind of urgency, which is, as you get down there, which is a problem. There's nobody even running slowly throughout the ship. It's just like they're lightly jogging as they look for it.
Yeah, I want to point out that like when they decide that they're going to go and scan for it manually on the promenade, they take the super slow elevators they have on the station down. They don't beam to the promenade, which would be a little bit faster. And then when they get to Quark's bar, they're like looking at the tricorder and walking briskly.
They're
briskly. That means a little bit of urgency.
Briskly walking. And there's and again, there's all this really poor attempts at building tension. Like when Sisko goes to the slow elevator, he says, "Mr. O'Brien, you have the con." And they do a close up on O'Brien's face like he's nervous. He doesn't seem that nervous. Just kind of is like, oh, okay. And then so they find it like that's it, and then like okay, Sisko takes out his comm badge, says, beam my comm badge, and whatever's on my comm badge out into space, 5,000 meters or 5,000 kilometers, whatever. And they do it, and it turns into a space baby or something. Flies off.
Space moth or a stingray.
And that's it, And Quark's like, I didn't get paid yet. He still made I'm assuming they didn't confiscate the rest of the stuff they sold, which means he did pretty well that day.
Yeah.
And so did Vosh. So anyway, and basically that ends the thread. It also ends any interaction that Q has with anyone other than Bosch.
Yeah. Basically, this
You know,
episode
like how they
is just,
like.
yeah, just nothing
Yeah.
interesting happens. It just kind of
Nothing
is
interesting
there.
happens. It just so that ends. There's tons of, and so Vosh gets. So they show Vosh talking with Q, and Q finally is like, "All right, I'll let you go. I'm gonna miss hanging out with you. I got to experience wonder when I was looking at a nebula through your eyes because you'd never seen it before," which is a nice thing to say. Um, but he never says it beforehand, and and again, since we just assume and since she's I don't know. I mean, whatever. Their relationship isn't really ever addressed in a proper way.
Yeah.
But anyway, he's like, all right, sorry for kind of bugging you. And considering he wasn't responsible for anything, he didn't even do all that much to bug her. He was just sort of there. And she goes and she finds Quark, and she's like, how do I get to this planet where they found some new things? So she's not even gonna go back to Earth. And I guess that's it. And then there's the terrible ending.
Yeah. Of Julian wakes up and
basically
it's missing like a freeze frame and crowd laughter from this being at the end of an 80s like a Family Ties episode.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of ends.
And he's like and it's slow too. It's like where they were slow for time again. Because he says it really slow, and Dax is like, she says this to Dax, and Dax gives him like a look and a head shake like, oh, you goof. But there's no dialogue. It's slow. Then they cut to the exterior of the station, and like instead of it immediately throwing up the produced by, it takes a good 25 extra seconds or so an exterior shot before they throw up the produced by. And it's just, and it ends. Nothing has been learned. Nothing of value has been gained.
It just kind of happens.
It's a status quo episode. Like nothing is. It's just, and it's not. It's a tale that's not told well.
Yeah.
And we never see Vosh again in the Star Trek universe. And the next time we see Q, Q never comes back to Deep Space Nine either, which is good. Maybe they learned that he's
not the right character to have in that. Yeah, like he's not the right character to be in the DS9 universe. Like it's just not. The whimsy is not what they do.
Yeah, so the episode just sort of ends. Like it peters out, runs out of story, and it tells a bad joke at the very end, and thankfully it ended. And it seems like it took forever, though. Only 42 minutes long.
Yeah. At which point,
and
then it's just you're kind of like, oh, all right, the show gets renewed. Yeah. Good to know.
Well, yeah, this is only the 5th episode, right? But I mean, the lack of stakes, the lack of any kind of emotional resonance, or even a end of a story that ends on a way that makes you feel like you've just watched something that was at least worth your time does not exist. Anyway, so that's how it ends, and then that's the end of Keyless. Do you want to take a break?
Of Keyless. Let's take a short break, and then we'll get into odds, ends, and other important bits. So we'll be back in just 1 second. And we're back. I think that what bothers me most about this episode is they even have a toss away line in which, somebody talks to Q and he mentions, oh yeah, I should check in with Picard. Because this episode wastes Q. And then literally the week after was the TNG episode Tapestry, which is, in my opinion, probably the best use of Q, because he basically gets to pretend he's God and in a very Loki-ish way do, a version of A Christmas Carol with Picard, but it's fun and interesting. Yeah. Like we get to see what Picard would have been like if he had just kind of been like a simple, boring officer.
If he'd been O'Brien.
Yeah, if he had been Miles O'Brien. Which apparently in one of the books they expanded upon like that version of Picard, where it's like after that encounter and like the mere touch of the good Picard, he's like, maybe I could be a decent officer. And he, like O'Brien, suddenly becomes useful to people.
I almost want to dig that up because it's a great episode, and that version of Picard, like again, Tapestry is I'll start talking about it because that's like one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek Next Generation. Picard's my favorite Next Generation character, but B, it also has Q, who's my favorite side character, and they're doing their like they're doing their best work in that episode. Plus, we get to know more about Picard's past, which is always fun, because Picard's past is very interesting. Lesson in the best way, in the way that you want Q to do. And then you've also got we're not here to talk about a good episode of Star Trek. We're talking about this terrible episode we watched.
Yes, which was boring, slow, and uninteresting, which is like really impressive to do because Star Trek, usually is at least fun and interesting, and this is like the worst outcome because, you kind of see the shape, you kind of see the form of what's to come. It's an early season episode, but my God, is it boring. This. Like, I watched this while I was at the gym because I knew that I had like 30 to 45 minutes where I was going to be sitting on an exercise bike. And I didn't have anything else to do. And even then, I was like, this is so boring.
It really is. I'm going to go and say that, as much as we were, as terrible as Threshold is, at least something happens dramatically in the episode. In Voyager.
There's definitely a sense of urgency.
I'll say this for the first season of Voyager. The first season of Voyager may be better than the first season of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, even though it is a hot take, mainly because Deep Space Nine's, they were laying the groundwork, but they didn't have that story plotted out yet. They only had the Bajoran political stuff really going on, and frankly, I always found what's going on with Kai, what's her name, relatively boring. Kardashians and the founders got involved. Really good on that. So, and I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say Voyager is a much worse series overall, but they don't know what the heck they're doing on Deep Space Nine. And maybe the problem is also that this is the first thing Rick Berman's created too, right? And Berman's prints are all over this. Whereas, and he also didn't have Brandon Braga, for all his faults, I think was able to at least get some of the more pulpier aspects. Whereas you've got Michael Pilar, who is good, but he's also kind of stuffy. Then you've got Berman, who doesn't have any good instincts at all when it comes to storytelling. So you get this kind of episode where things just where nothing important happens. Like there's where the characters act dumb. The idiot plot. Kind of thing. Like what's causing? Like the biggest thing is what's causing these graviton particles. Well, what's changed? What's different than it was the day before? We had the graviton things on this ship, and that's what caused us to lose. What was on the ship? Well, it wasn't Q. It was Vosh and her bag of tricks, which they never even talk about. Like they never even they don't actually solve it. They only solve it through using the scanning. They don't think, hey, I wonder if something what's her name brought back from the Gamma Quadrant, about which at this point we know next to nothing, might be doing something about this. And Star Trek for
they're chasing the symptom the whole episode rather than actually trying to engage and solve the problem. Like it's literally not until they can't avoid it anymore that they actually get off their ass and do something to resolve this problem. And it's just it feels like such a waste.
It's a big waste of time. And instead of having say, I don't know, Q involved maybe in a deeper way, he's just sort of there to be an abusive ex-boyfriend. Which again it's a terrible waste of him.
Yeah. And then John Delancey apparently put it best for like how this goes, because his line about this episode is Q is best used when he deals with large philosophical issues. And skirt chasing isn't one of them. And that's literally what he does in this episode is he's constantly chasing after Vash to like bring her back. And that's just not interesting use of Q. Whereas you would look at Tapestry, and that is like he is very much talking about like the impact that small choices can have in our lives, and it fleshes out like Picard's background in a way that like makes the episode more interesting. So having these two back to back, you get a real study in contrast. Like yes, one show was already well into its run and was at the peak of its powers, but even so, like. Maybe they could have gotten somebody to advise on like the use on Q himself. But you were telling me earlier that this episode was originally written with just Vash and not Q. And I think that this episode really suffers because they tried to wedge Q in, and there's no need for him in this episode. Like having him turn around at the beginning to me is like the signal that everything is off the rails at this point, because we're going to try and wedge in a character who just doesn't add anything this time, which is a terrible wasted cue.
Yeah, and it really is, and it's a good thing they ever brought him back. They learned their lesson. Like if you look at Memory Elf and some of the reviews, like of the stuff that the people who wrote the show, like, oh, we loved having him, it was great, and but they're not talking about the fact that it was clearly something that they weren't able to go back to because he just doesn't work, and then of course they ruined Q on Voyager, but that's a whole other story. Voyager ruined a lot of things. The Borg, Q, my faith in humanity.
Any concept of the Prime Directive actually mattering a damn to a captain?
I mean, what's annoying is that I think what's really also frustrating about this episode from a Deep Space Nine perspective is that, like, the characters are mostly passive. O'Brien, notices things and gives some advice, talks about the captain, referring to Picard, and again, he's only recently stopped working with Picard, so obviously a connection. But even Cisco is sort of like there. He, like, Q kind of runs into him, but shows up a couple times, gives him hints, and again, he figures out that Q's not responsible for it, but he can't quite figure out what the real problem is. And so they have to go through all this whole, the whole rigmarole trying to figure out, the really hard way around to find the answer, because they're sitting there, and then again, I think Kira has 4 lines. Dax does not have that. There's maybe 4 or 5 lines in the entire episode. O'Brien, I think, has the most of anyone besides Quark, and again, mostly his is exposition to tell Avery Brooks. I keep telling, to tell Cisco exactly what's going on, and then Cisco kind of doesn't really even. He after he punches Q out, there's one more interaction between them, but there's no final interaction to wrap everything up. There's no philosophical ending. It just ends. No. And that's the biggest. That's the mirror universe Q. He's boring. He doesn't do anything that's fun, and he doesn't tackle the big philosophical question. That mirror Q right there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much more there is to say about this episode, because ultimately it's just not interesting, not engaging, and it's like a massive waste of not only John Delancey and Q and Vash, but also of what Deep Space Nine is. Maybe our opinion is biased by the fact that we've seen what Deep Space Nine becomes and the kind of interesting stories that it tells. But even so, this is just a profoundly boring episode of television.
Well, I mean,
full stop. I can rag on, what is it, Law and Order all the time, but at the very least, the formula they had, even going back to the original days, at least was compelling to a certain degree. And nothing about this episode is compelling.
You get an actual ending, whether it's the one you want. I mean, sometimes in Law and Order, the bad guy gets away, and you're like, damn it. And maybe you don't think much more about it, but at least you're entertained. It's like this. It's the problem with even trying to talk about this episode is there's nothing to it. It's fluff, and it's the worst kind of fluff. And the fact that it's not even fun. It's basically it's cotton candy but flavored plain. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like a pop. It's like a plain water.
Exactly.
Popsicle.
It's like you're sucking on ice. Like, oh, doesn't it taste good? No, it's just cold water.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't have anything else to add. I mean, we never see.
I think
Vashi.
we can just wrap the conversation.
This is the last time we see her. And this episode is best forgotten, I think, and maybe that's why, a lot of, what's funny is the best bad Trek is usually have some kind of goofiness to recommend it. There's no goofiness at all. It's just boring. It's bad.
Yeah. Well, I say that we start wrapping the episode here and just let this mercifully go. Although I do have some real bad news for you.
What's that?
Which is that our next episode is Endgame from Voyager, the series finale.
We went from the 5th episode to not the 5th episode. We went from late season 1 to the final.
It was season 2 actually.
To Endgame.
Yeah.
Oh man, this is at this point this is the worst of everything Voyager is though.
Yeah. I mean, and the worst part is, it's a double length episode because we actually it was supposed to be a two-parter, or it was a
Right.
special event. And the thing is, it could really have been told in 1 hour. And what bothered me at the time, and still bothers me to this day, is the fact that, like, any kind of resolution to the episode and their whole journey is written off with Janeway saying, "I'll have a report on your desk on Monday," and
Yep.
the series ends. Like, there's nothing afterwards. Like, at least with the Next Generation, I think they had the perfect ending. They had the episode, and then Picard walked into, like, the card game that the senior staff had been playing forever, and he said, "I should have done this a long time ago. They said you were always welcome," and they start playing cards, and the ship sails off into the sunset. That's the best fucking ending that Star Trek has ever had.
That's true.
Bar none.
That is absolutely true. Though actually the Deep Space Nine finale, while slightly frustrating, isn't terrible either. I'm kind of I'm frustrated with.
Well, somebody has to finish second.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, no. This one is the only worst. I mean, I'll say the ending to Enterprise is worse, but that's only because it was kneecapped by Berman. And again, and I think that's a different case. I mean, you had like Voyager's ending is, as we'll get into next week, incredibly frustrating for a whole bunch of reasons, and we'll talk about them. But let's not talk about that right now. Let's talk about the next Trek that is coming up. Not in our episode, but to our mobile devices and tablets and computers on CBS Direct or whatever it's going to be called. This is Star Trek Discovery this week as we're recording.
Yeah.
Finally, the first trailer, which is actually seems like a teaser for the first episode of the show, hit, and we have some thoughts, and not many of which are good.
Honestly, yeah. I mean, the thing that bothers me most is that this very much looks like the new movie universe Star Trek, but they've acknowledged that it takes place within the established Prime universe. And that to me is a big problem, because I get that there's a noticeable difference in the passage of literally 50 years from the original series to now. But at the same time, trying to overhaul the entire look to really reflect, not necessarily like the term, the JJ verse, it's bad. Particularly because there are episodes of the original series where we flash back to when Pike was captain of the Enterprise, almost 10 years before. So we get a good look at what the Federation looked like before Kirk was on board the bridge of the Enterprise. He was off on the Farragut doing whatever, but, they were wearing like the sweater-like uniforms. And now they're wearing this blue jumpsuit with like gold, silver, or bronze piping, which, thanks guys. Thanks for making the visual cues for like the different divisions easily seen.
And thanks for and thank you also for introducing a race that was created to sense death. And thanks for redesigning.
Yeah, like, you know what? What if that guy gets a false positive? What if he has like allergies and he starts picking up like other things, and the captain's like, "Oh my god, we're gonna die at every moment," and it's just him having the sniffles?
Well, then it's like self-fulfilling, because they probably killed him.
Like, this is a bad concept.
Yeah, of course it's a bad concept. Obviously it's something we haven't seen the episode, and I really hate to judge too much by a trailer. I'm just gonna throw it out there that I mean, like Swear Track was going hard against people who were complaining about the look of it. But I'm going to say this, at least the JJ verse, which I like to call it more than the Kelvin timeline, at least the JJ verse found a way to make the original uniforms look sort of like look like they updated them, but they still, it's the original uniform. And I mean, it looks.
Yeah, it stayed faithful to the content.
The only thing that's going on is they've got the Enterprise Delta, which obviously, if you're a hardcore Star Trek fan, originally that was only supposed to be the Enterprise's symbol, and all the different ships have their own different symbol. This was not the Starfleet symbol; it was the symbol for the ship. I'm obviously glad they went with that to be the Starfleet symbol and kind of retconned it. That's fine, but if it, it's not the Enterprise. It's the whatever ship it's supposed to be. Um,
It's not even
yeah,
Discovery. It's the
yeah,
Shenzhou, which is like, and clearly this whole like trailer is just like the intro to the first episode because it's like we have the main character, something
yeah,
bad happens to the ship, and she's picked up by the Klingons, and then she has to talk to Sarek at the end as like her debriefing. Which why Sarek is involved
yeah.
is a good question,
Maybe it's just a
but
connection to
whatever.
the. Maybe just a way to connect it. Maybe we'll figure it out.
Yeah,
But the other thing is, I hate the way the Klingons look. There's like why. I mean,
yeah,
I know the JJ verse gave us Klingons a little bit of their take on them briefly in Into Darkness. But why? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Is my opinion. Especially this is taking place in the Star Trek timeline. I'm all for retconning why Klingons didn't have ridges back in the Next Generation, the original series episode. I'm not gonna be like, I'm not some like they don't have to like oh if it takes place 10 years prior they should all look like Klingons that like old school like they're just with a bunch of face gold face paint on. No, I don't need that. There's no reason to give them a whole new look. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, there's a couple of discussions that I've seen online. Like supposedly these are ancient Klingons that have been woken up. Okay, maybe
Didn't they
that
have
explains some of
Congress?
it, but also like something like that. And then they had like the whole thing, and I actually read this on Memory Alpha, so I only know bits and pieces of in Enterprise. They discussed why there aren't ridges, and apparently it boils back to the Klingons encountered
Oh
some
yeah,
of
yeah,
Khan's
that's right.
people and like tried to use some of the genetic modification, and it wound up making
Yeah,
them flat foreheaded. So there, it's weird that like we have whether it's the Kelvin timeline or the Prime timeline, Enterprise is
and
still
both. That's
canon
right.
in
Yeah,
both.
that's right. That
So
is the explanation.
at this point, like the flat forehead is kind of like
Yep.
the norm, which
They ran
who
into
knows?
Khan's people or the guy who helped create Khan, who was also related distantly
Yeah.
to Dr. Noonien Singh. Don't
Oh,
you remember that? He's
that's
also
right. I,
basically because they
yeah.
wanted to hey I like what's his name Brett Spiner. They brought Brett
Brett Spiner.
Spiner in for the episode to play I guess Data's great grandfather,
Great,
who's
great,
also
great,
a
great
genetic war
grandfather.
criminal.
Yeah.
Um, that's what that surprise. Yeah,
Surprise!
yeah. That's exactly it. That's where that is where the Klingons. That's those certain Klingons that lost their ridges. And that's I mean they can do that. I mean I don't really care
Yeah.
about that. But just the complete redesign seems completely unnecessary. And again, it's like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I guess Star
Yeah.
Trek fans are we do tend to be sort of sticklers for continuity, but which is
Yeah.
kind of stupid in a lot of ways, considering they didn't care in the original series that much, and even Next Generation didn't care all that much, and the movies rewrote a whole bunch of what happened. But we care, and if we're gonna be fans,
Yeah.
I'm gonna nerd out over the continuity. Anyway, so
And, the thing for me is that as much as the continuity is an issue, I look at this kind of the same way that to jump ship to something totally different, the Chicago Bears picking Mitchell Trubisky,
yeah,
which is that if it turns out to be good, I can set
oh
all
yeah,
this shit aside to enjoy some decent Star Trek. Like, I will
that's
get
true.
the hell over it once I can actually
That's
see it
absolutely
if
true.
it's enjoyable. But, like, the funny part is, like, in watching these old episodes, it's like, I don't have a whole lot of faith in
No,
first seasons of Star
no.
Trek at this point. So I'm a
The best
little
first
worried.
season of a Star Trek series was Star Trek: The Original Series. I think they
Yeah,
had, and
bar none.
I think they had
Bar
most of the
none.
scripts written. It seems like with these, especially with Next Generation on, it's like they were writing as they were going on. Especially Deep Space Nine seems like it was like half formed when they were writing it. But
Yeah. But once Deep Space Nine like got
yeah,
into arcs and plotting and like really got it down, it
yeah,
gets
but
really good. It's just like this one particular like episode is just clearly like you said they're just piecemealing it and winging it, and it's
no, it
not a
just
good
makes for
combo.
dull, 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 dull. Well, anyway, that's it. Unless you have anything else you'd like to say about Alabama barbecue.
Uh, the idea sickens me. as does most anything that comes from Alabama. So I think this is a good spot to wrap the episode. Patrick, it's been wonderful talking to you. Let's just go ahead and put this awful, awful memory of an episode.
Yep, till we talk again, live long and prosper, Tim.
Live long and prosper, Patrick. Thank you again for Captain Meatshield for the outro, and we're done.